Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Wilson, and I am really delighted today to welcome Krissy Cannizzo to our program, People in Fundraising. Hi, Krissy.
Hi.
It's good to see you. Yeah, and for season 2, I'm trying to invite guests to People in Fundraising, the nonprofit webcast, who their day-to-day job may not necessarily be related to fundraising, but they work in nonprofits, they're in small town America, and I'm just really excited to have Krissy with us today. She and I went through elementary all the way through high school together in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Some of our questions toward the end of our program will touch on some personal questions related to her stepfather, George Mitchell, and I'll preface who George was when we get to that point in the program. Krissy has been at the Children's Museum of Easton, or CME, for 10 years as the Director of Education and Outreach. And I love, Krissy, that you've got some posters in the background. This is your office at the CME, so I'm excited to chat with you today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So, Krissy, let's first hear, please, how you became involved with the Children's Museum Easton, and then if you could describe for our audience your main responsibilities there as the Director of Education and Outreach, please.
Sure. So I came to the museum about 10 years ago, like you said. Before that, I was the one of the directors at a childcare center in a city around the corner. I loved it. But at that point, I was a mom with very young children. Mm-hmm. And for anyone, it was a nonprofit also, but for anyone that has done childcare work before, they know that you wear many hats. Nonprofit also, you wear many hats. So on the weekends, I would come in and I was doing maintenance work. I was building furniture. I was, painting walls, that kind of stuff. My husband also. So, the daily hours. It's not a 9-to-5 kind of job. The toll it takes on you, it's a lot. And when you have young children, it's not the ideal kind of schedule. So, at some point, it just needed to. My family needed to come first. So I decided to look for something that was a little bit more flexible. I think 9 years I was at the childcare center. I decided Nick was in kindergarten, Aiden was in preschool. I thought this would be a good time to venture out. So I came to the museum actually part-time, and I was one of the traveling teachers for the enrichment program, the CME 360 program. And I did that for a few years. And then the position as the manager, the director of the traveling program opened up. So then I took over for that. And I have been doing that ever since. So, and I'm loving it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and it's been growing, the program, and now my boys are 16 and 14, and are much more self-sufficient. So, if I have to pull a few more hours here and there than the typical 40, it's fine. So it works. And as far as what I do here, the CME 360 program, it is a traveling enrichment program. So what I do, or what we do, is it is an enrichment program that goes to public and private schools. It goes to libraries. It goes to community programs. Basically, anybody that wants to have us, they book us. and they pick one of our themes. Like, for example, today I was at a school, I did 4 classrooms, 4 programs, and we bring in all of the materials, all the supplies for all the children, and we teach the lessons, the programs, and the children are actually doing all the hands-on activities that go along with the theme. They're building, they're experimenting, they're doing the STEAM activities, and then within that hour, and then I kind of take my wagon, move to the next classroom, and start again with the next group.
Oh,
so a lot of fun.
That is so cool.
Yeah, so I'm a traveling teacher on wheels, basically. So it's a good time though. Enjoy it.
That's awesome. And I failed to mention earlier that the CME Children's Museum Easton is in Easton, Massachusetts on the South Shore.
Yes.
So are the schools that you travel to, are they primarily South Shore? Do you go into Rhode Island or anywhere else?
In the past, I have done schools in Rhode Island, but generally speaking, it's Massachusetts. It's just strictly Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
During COVID, we did do virtual programs, and I did have somebody call from Las Vegas.
Oh, wow.
Which was very exciting that they wanted to have our program out there. Because we would mail out the kits. But yeah, generally speaking, it's just Massachusetts. I will go travel rates apply, so we will go out to Western Mass, but generally it's just on the southeastern area.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
And as a follow-up, Krissy, you've got this awesome board right behind your chair, and it says STEAM 360. And you and I are connected on Facebook as well, and you're really generous at sharing your enthusiasm for the CME and the work you do there. So I would love if you'd spend a few minutes talking about how you developed this interest in STEAM, what it stands for, and what the STEAM 360 is, please.
Sure. So STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Sometimes you hear people say STEM, they drop the A.
Yeah.
To be honest, it really depends usually on funding. In Massachusetts, if it's curriculum, sometimes you hear stuff. So it's just the ST and the E. It, like I said, it's really depending on the funding. But I'm really passionate about it because I love the idea that it's an all-encompassing way of it's an all-encompassing way of bringing a concept or bringing an activity. It touches upon all different styles of learning. So yeah. I have years of experience teaching preschool and pre-K. So I bring my experience from there into my lesson plans, and I also like to think back to how I was taught when I was a child. And you mentioned that you and I grew up together. So, and I love our former teachers. So this isn't a slight on any of our teachers. Yeah. But when we were kids, I don't remember doing a lot of hands-on activities when we were kids. A lot of it was textbooks.
Yeah.
And that's just how it was in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I have learned is I am not a textbook learner. So, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. It just means that I'm not the visual learner. So, and here's a perfect example. So, we grew up together. I have a brother who's my age, and I don't think God would be upset at that. But there are times that we would take the same kind of class, biology together, and so we would have the same textbook, and Brad would be able to look at the textbook, and he would read it for a half hour, and then he would close it, and then I would see him, playing video games, for the rest of the night or whatever. Meanwhile, I would look at the textbook and I would be reading it and reading it and reading it, and it was not sinking in. And I probably was doing flashcards. I probably had my mom or George, my stepdad, quizzing me, whatever it was. It just wasn't comprehending. And the next day we go into school and Brad would get an A on it, and I would hopefully skim by with a C, and it was so frustrating. And I can vividly remember, and I don't even know if Brad knows this, but I remember having conversations with George, being a teacher, and saying, like, and just be crying and saying, like, I don't get it. What is wrong with me?
Yeah.
And I remember George, and this is, years, and we're older now. I don't want to say how many years old, how long ago it was, but many, many years ago. I remember George saying, kids learn differently. And, and he was like a pioneer, like he would say that everybody learns. As for many reasons, I wish he were still alive, because I wish that I could bounce these ideas off of him.
Oh, sure.
I wish I could have, because I don't remember having things taught to me in different ways. Everybody just had the textbook,
Yeah.
I can't learn like that. And now I see my boys, they learn differently. They're not the same exact way. There's I always think, and I show it at the museum. I have a huge sign that's printed on the wall. There's a developmental psychologist, Howard Gardner, that has multiple intelligence theories. And he talks about there's 8 different styles of learning, and they all work independently. And it's how you process information. So you could be learning it verbally, you have that strength. You could be doing it musically. You could be doing it logically, like mathematically is your strength. I wish I knew that. I mean, I was a child, but I wish people knew that more when we were younger, because I would have known that I'm the type of person that everything has to be hands-on. Like, I need to touch things. Like, I need to get in there and do it. Because if I had been able to do like hands-on learning, I think I would have done a lot better in school, and I wouldn't have been so anxiety ridden when it came to school and so stressed out. So that's why I think, in a long story short, I think that I'm so passionate about STEM, because it lets you teach the lesson, but in so many different avenues, different ways of teaching it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And that's really helpful background, how it impacted you, and just being cognizant of different learning styles. I think, we were just a product of a different generation. And I remember those awful phonics books, and later in junior high and high school, I really struggled in math, and my dad did too. And so it was like amplified. He wanted me to do better than he did. And I just couldn't learn math the way it was being taught. And so I also knew that, like, he was hoping I would do better. And so that was like an added kind of burden in a way. Like, and, now I see how my wife teaches math to elementary school students, and when she tutors, and it's like, man, that's very different. And I think,
absolutely,
absolutely,
it's just a different, like, pedagogy, like, learning style. But obviously it's generations different, but I think STEAM or STEM, I think it gives you more opportunity to try different styles. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue, Krissy, into a question I wanted to pose. You've shared about this quote from Mr. Rogers, and I'll read the quote, and then I would love for you to share how you've seen what Mr. Rogers says about how children learn through your work at CME. So Mr. Rogers said, quote, "Play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood," end quote. And I feel like, as a parent, And, as someone who grew up watching Mr. Rogers, like that just gives me chills. So
Mm,
I would love to hear, how you've seen that in your work with CME, please.
absolutely. He is one of my idols.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel that if I'm doing my job correctly, I am providing children that either walk through the door at the museum or each time I'm doing lessons, programs when I go out to schools or libraries or whatever. I'm giving them opportunities to learn, but in fun and engaging way through play.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be tedious. It shouldn't be stressful. It shouldn't cause that anxiety, that hit in your stomach, that feeling that I sometimes had.
Yeah.
So I definitely, I mean, the age group that I work with now, it's preschool through grade 4. So I
Mm.
still have the littles. But even at that young age, it was stressful for me.
Mm.
And I can share because, again, we grew up together. In second grade, I figured out enough that every day, it only worked for a few days, but every day in 1 week, I figured out that when math time came, I was going to have a stomachache.
Oh.
So, and so it worked for a few days
Mm.
until when I tried it, probably the third or the fourth day, I had to go see guidance. So,
Oh.
and then they called my mother. So
Oh.
it was a whole meeting. So I wasn't too slick on that. So but that was my coping mechanism because it was causing me so much stress. Probably because it was taught in that textbook way. It was all visual, and
Yeah.
that's not how I learned. Um, so, you know, but again, if I was taught in a different way, but well, um,
Yeah.
so I definitely, um, it shouldn't be painful for children. So, um, and I've heard I've heard people say, that we talked a little bit about my stepdad, George, that his room at times, if you look through his window when he was teaching, it was just chaos because there's children everywhere doing something different. And I think it wasn't chaos. Sometimes people would be like, well, it was organized chaos because he knew what each of those children were doing. And
Mm.
I think absolutely. But a step further, that that is meeting each child's needs.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I don't have the only difference with me is that I'm not in a classroom anymore. So I have a different child every single time like somebody walks through the door. So it's a
Mm.
little different, it's a little harder for me. So my job now is to be kind of general and meet every child's needs when they come through the store and just assume what their needs are. So I'm making sure that I'm trying to be culturally as diverse as I can be
Mm-hmm.
with the materials that we have at the museum. I want to try to be appropriate with like the materials, the exhibit pieces that we have. I want them to be challenging. I want them to be diverse, all of these things, but I also want them to be fun and engaging.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. I also want them to withstand because we're a small nonprofit and we can't keep replacing things. So I have a lot of challenges. So it's a little tricky, but I always think of that in the back of my head. It's kind of like, what would George do? What would George
Mm.
do? Instead of like, what would Jesus do? Like the fish, I'm always like, what would George do? What would George do?
Yeah.
As far as, working with children. And to kind of tie it in as far as with nonprofits, a lot of it is supported with grants, with the materials and the things that we have. And we're lucky and fortunate that we have local grants that will
Mm.
help pay for a lot of that. And some of that I do actually apply for myself,
Oh.
cultural grants that include math and sciences, which is good. And those are a lot of times pretty easy to apply for. It's just the application. You just kind of fill in the little boxes. So I'm not very grant savvy. So I don't want to say that I apply for grants, but I do those ones myself. I wouldn't say that I'm a grant writer at all. But I do those ones myself. But yeah, I kind of think that if that answers your question, I know that was kind of roundabout. It's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, not only did you answer that question, but you also talked about the fundraising side.
Yeah.
But that was great. That's good.
It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. I mean, being a small nonprofit is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead. You can ask the question if you want.
Yeah, so I was just gonna, you've started to go there with the grants, and that's awesome. So as someone whose day-to-day is outside of the development fundraising side of it, could you just share like how donors support, how you've personally seen the impact to advance the work of CME, please?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we're a small nonprofit. We rely heavily on the donations, the sponsorship of supporters in our community. Me specifically, what I oversee, the CME 360 program. We're very fortunate. We have a generous supporter, National Grid, who, they're awesome. They value the museum and what we're able to provide, people coming and what we're able to provide here at the museum, but they are big supporters of what we're able to provide out in the community, which is great. And they've done that for many years, which is awesome. We also have support. Massachusetts is a great state for cultural grants, which is awesome. Every state has cultural funds, and the federal government gives it to states, and then they decide the amounts, and then the states. I should say that. No, I'm sorry, I'm messing that up. Massachusetts, not every state. Massachusetts gives that to every town and city, and then the town themselves decides who they want to give the money to.
Okay.
And so I go ahead. This is where I come in. So I go ahead and I ask the Bridgewater Public Library. I will call them and I'll say, "Hi, would you like us to apply for funding to bring our program to you this summer?" And they'll say, "Sure." I mean, usually say yes, because we do all the paperwork. We apply, we do all the paperwork, we do all the PR for them. All they have to do is just host us.
So neat. Yeah.
So I do all the work, basically. They have us. So the only time that they usually don't is if they are already applying for something on their own and they don't want too many applications going in for their library. So we've done that for multiple summers. So yeah, I think I have 15 grants of those this summer.
Neat.
So, lots of paperwork. We're very fortunate. Massachusetts is great supporter.
Awesome. Yeah.
But, grants are huge. It's our backbone for a nonprofit. Funding and backbone for us.
Yeah, definitely.
Essential.
Well, I want to key in, Krissy, in this next segment by what you mentioned the word backbone just then. And I'd love to pivot. We have about 15 minutes or so left. I'd love to pivot, of course, now to George Mitchell, who was your stepfather in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And before I go any further, I want to share this photograph. So this is the incomparable George Mitchell, and he designed the full day readiness program that I took at this building, McElwain School in Bridgewater. And Krissy, this is amazing. Timing is amazing, and we can get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. In terms of timing, Krissy just toured this building in Bridgewater a few days ago. It's now been renovated, and she says it looks beautiful. It's apartments, still on the same site. And so this is where I took Readiness. And you mentioned, Krissy, sort of kids in the basement of McElwain, in different groups doing their own individual learning. And yet Mr. Mitchell, George, knew exactly what each student was working on, what their particular strengths and challenges were in terms of learning. And so this, for me, this was in the fall of 1981 to the spring of 1982. And in the spring of 2021, I actually interviewed almost every kid in this photograph just to get their recollections, because it was the 40th anniversary of Mr. Mitchell being our teacher. And the stories they could still recall 40 years later were amazing. There's in the middle row, kind of right in the middle, is a girl in a red dress. That's Nancy Levangie. And when I talked with her for the book, one thing she said that just sticks out in my mind is, what was the impact of Mr. Mitchell in your life? And Nancy answered that by saying, he taught me to read.
Love it.
So yeah, so then in terms of timing, we're going to air this interview on Monday, June 19th of this year. And that will be, that's George's birthday. So again, just the timing is amazing. As I reached out to Krissy, I thought, let's try and get this done in the spring. And then looking at the calendars and said, hey, how about we can air this on his birthday? And his birthday just happens to be on a Monday this year, and that's when I post these interviews. So again, just the timing is really impressive. And I think it, in a sense, meant to be, and that George is still helping to facilitate that. So yeah, just an amazing person and teacher. So with that as background to just an incredible educator and human being that he was, I had two questions that I would love for you to cover here. The first one, I talked about how George, Mr. Mitchell, his Mitchell's Monsters, he touched countless lives as an educator, as an educational advocate. And also as I talked to some of those other kids that were in my grade that year, they remarked that they would see George and your mom at all these sporting events and arts events throughout the town, even after their own kids, you and Brad and Darcy and Don had already moved on. Or maybe you weren't even involved in those particular events, but they were still there supporting other kids. They loved Bridgewater, just such an amazing connection to the community. So as his stepdaughter, you obviously had a much closer relationship with George. So on his birthday coming up on June 19th, and we're chatting on May 19th, what stands out to you about George's passion for education, his ability to connect with people, and I think maybe in a larger sense also perhaps his outlook on life.
I've been thinking about this. It's so hard because there's so much you could share about George.
Yeah.
It's hard to just think of one thing. He had an amazing gift. When you had those few moments of one-on-one time where because he was all over the place too. When you had those moments with him, he made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And when you spoke with him, he made you feel like he heard you, but that he was also listening, which I think is very different. And and in some way resonates to me kind of similar to like a Fred Rogers in that way, that made you feel like you were so special.
Indeed.
And I think his feeling was there were no throwaway children. He was big on taking, there was always going to be some child, and it happened every year, that, was the tough child that the other teachers were like, oh, I don't know if I want that child in my classroom. Oh, that one gives that other, you heard from the year before, that's the tough child that makes the other kids a little hard to deal with.
Yeah.
George welcomed that child in his room, and he made them feel special.
Absolutely.
He made everybody feel welcomed and special, no matter what. From every walk of life, it didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter what socioeconomic status you were. It didn't matter what your past was as an adult. One of the things he used to do, he used to go to the prison and volunteer and read to the prisoners. Like, I don't know if people knew that. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
He was one of those people that the things that he would do, he didn't make public. He wasn't there doing it so other people knew. He was just a good person.
Oh, yeah.
But he was also hysterical. He was very, very funny. He also had like that stupid humor too, where you would just feel like, oh my gosh, one of George's jokes where you couldn't sit through a meal without him doing like 100 puns, where you had to be like, to this day, my kids will say something and I'll be like, that's a George joke. Like, just stop. Like, that's a George. My kids never got to meet him, obviously, but they know, like, that's a George thing. Oh, we called him his grandkids know him as Guppa. So that's a Guppa joke.
Oh, okay.
So something that I was thinking of something that I don't even know if my siblings know this. I don't even know if my mom knows this. Well, I should preface it by saying I think he had conversations with each of us, each of the siblings, each of the kids that continued on. So it wasn't like a once and done. That made you feel special too. And I don't know if my siblings know this, and again, I don't know if my mom knows this, but he had this pipe dream, I'll say, and it wasn't for a retirement. And they're going to think he was crazy for this, but he was genuine with this. But can you imagine this? He had this vision with me that he and I were going to buy an ice cream truck.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right? And he used to say, Chris, we're going to buy an ice cream truck. And I was like, okay. And and he had it planned out. And we're going to buy an ice cream truck. And in the summers, we're going to drive it, and we're going to drive it down to Legion Field.
Mm.
And he talked a mile a minute. We're going to buy it down, and we're going to drive it down Legion Field, and we're going to think of how much we're going to sell. We're going to sell it, and it was probably because he drank Coke, so much Coke, and it was like the caffeine just going, blah, blah, blah. But he thought, and as a kid, I thought this would be the greatest idea, And then now as an adult, I think that is the worst idea ever, because everybody knew him in town, and he probably would have given everything for free.
Yes.
We would have been out of business in like a month. Because he would have been like, oh, Mitchell's Monster. Oh, yeah, give that to your kids. He would have given everything for free. Yeah. It would have been fun for a month. And not been able to afford it the next month. But yeah. I have my own, I've taken that, and I have my own vision of, and I feel like it's morphed out of that. And I wish George were alive today so that I could have done this with him. Because I feel like he would have been retired obviously by now, but I think I could have gotten him to do this with me. I want to get a new school bus, and I want to gut it out, and I want to make it into a STEAM classroom.
Oh, wow.
And I want to be able to drive it into areas where the children can't actually come into the museum because of transportation or whatever. And I could totally see George going to these places with me and teaching.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of like I'm morphing his ice cream truck.
Yeah.
With my STEAM mobile.
That's beautiful. I love that idea.
Yeah, so that way, because when we do field trips here, or field trips in general, like 2/3 of the cost is transportation because of how expensive the buses are.
Oh,
so
okay.
That way I could drive to, one of the cities around here, go into the inner cities, and then park it at one of the community centers. And then they can just come out and do the programs with me, instead of them trying to come here.
Yeah.
Awesome at it with me.
Oh my goodness. Don't give up on that dream. That sounds so amazing.
So I have another friend. I have a friend who just retired from the Brockton Public Schools, and she is a younger version of George, a female version of George too. And I think she's worked in the Brockton school system for her whole career pretty much. And she, every time I talk to her, she's always saying, have you gotten your bus yet? Have you gotten your bus? And she's my inspiration too. So yeah, I'll be there someday.
Yes, you will. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, so great. Well, my last question here, Krissy, and again, we talked about timing a few minutes ago. So tomorrow is the day that George passed away in 2002. And if I remember right, like, I wasn't living in Bridgewater at the time, but I feel like I saw a newspaper article that said the schools closed that day. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's a big deal.
Amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just the impact that one person had on thousands of people's lives. And yeah, just so cool. Before we started recording, you and I talked about George and a little bit of his view on the afterlife, and there are things that you and I both kind of feel strongly about on that topic. And again, I want to share a quote with you that you've shared on social media that George would relay to you. And it's from Albert Einstein. And Einstein said, quote, "Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another." So what about this quote spoke to you as George shared it, and what about it speaks to you now, please?
Absolutely. So that was one he always shared with me. he was, I mean, you know very well because you were in the class when he got sick. He always felt he was living on borrowed time. When he got sick with the esophageal cancer, at that point, it was very rare that you would survive from that type of cancer. And he did. He beat it, which was amazing. I mean, my mom and he were not married at that time, but from my understanding, he, down to the details, he picked out his suit for his funeral. He had planned out. So yeah. As far as that quote, I think, I mean, I was his stepdaughter, so he knew me very well. He knew I still am, highly, highly emotional. So I think that was his way of preparing me for when the time did come that he passed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was definitely his way. I think that during what we had talked about before we started recording is that he spoke of a near death experience during his cancer that gave him definitely a different perspective on life, that he knew he was very comforted with what he felt happened after his body in this present world.
Yeah.
So it didn't scare him, I don't think, per se. So he was very comfortable talking about, and of course, being Einstein and educational component to it, he was very comfortable with the idea that, don't be nervous about it because I'm always going to be here, just in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, quite. Thank you for sharing that. And that's so...
I did it without crying. Look at it. I'm like, hold it together. Hold it together.
You held it together, and I'm trying my best right now too.
Oh my gosh. Oof.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is it's unique for me to in this nonprofit podcast series. I don't I let guests talk a little bit about mentors or like their first boss or someone that was impactful in their career. But given the timing, with George's birthday and the impact he's had and the fact that we grew up together and all those ingredients, I thought I so appreciate you going there in this conversation to talk about George, as an educator, as your stepfather, as an incredible person in the community. I just think it's a privilege to give airtime to George. So
absolutely. No, he's been a huge impact on my career. Absolutely. I wish now I could share it with, have these conversations with him at, in my career time with him. I feel like if I could, if I'm doing my job correctly, if I could take George, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Bob Ross, and Miss Frizzle from Magic School Bus. Remember her?
Yes.
If I could take all of them and mesh them together, or at least like take a little bit from each of them, and that's kind of like me, like what if then I'm doing my job well. Like that's what I want, to be able to take a little from each of them. Then I feel like at the end of the day, then I hope, Mr. Rogers, of course. What am I thinking? I knew I was forgetting somebody. I need Fred in there. If I can take a little bit, if I've learned a little bit from each of them, then I hope that I hope that they're proud of me. So.
Oh, I'm sure they are. Absolutely. And George too.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, I think he is. He'll be more excited when I get that bus in.
Hey, I would love to talk with you, Krissy, offline about that bus because
I love it.
Yeah, that's exciting. You got me fired up about another project. So
okay, absolutely. This is so much fun.
Yeah. Well, Krissy, thank you so much for your time today. It's been funny, it's been informative, it's been certainly moving for the both of us. So yeah, it's been special to talk with you and to have you share your experiences and share that dream about the bus too. So
we'll get there.
Yes, you'll get there. So thank you. And then for our audience, you'll find Krissy's conversation on my website, peopleinfundraising.com, as well as on LinkedIn on Monday, June 19th of this year. And I'm excited to share it with the world. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Krissy, for your time today.
Thank you.